Just an update video, but I also wanted to talk about a few things as well that I've been doing some research on. First of all, I just want to show you, I've been doing some knitting, and this is one of the first flags I've done. I did do another one which I don't really want to show to camera because that was like my practice one, and it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of a bit tatty. This was like the second attempt, and this one's a lot better. Still some room for improvement, but this one is a lot better than the first one. And yeah, basically this is just a flag which I'm going to attach to make bunting. So just a really basic knitting project, like beginner's knitting, because obviously I'm a beginner. This is just a very basic garter stitch. It's like a very basic, the most basic of the knit stitches really. So it's like reversible on each side. And what I want to do is I want to when all the flags are done, because I'm going to do a few, some blue, some white, so blue and white basically, because I think those colour combos go together. I'm going to maybe stitch some felt onto there using a sewing knitting needle. Put some felt on there. I might stitch a fox on, I haven't decided yet. Something like that. And here's the one that's currently in progress. This one here, that's currently in progress. So we'll leave that on the needle for now. Let's put that back. Whoops! Oh dear, the camera's falling down. No, stay up, camera. Sorry. Just put that back over here. There we go. Yes, I'm still working on that one. I'm doing so it's 16 rows, 25. Sorry, 16 rows and 20. Yeah, 16 across and 25 down. But yeah, on that other white one I showed, I think I added a bit too many. When I was casting on, I added a bit too many stitches, but it doesn't really matter. So yes, that's what I've been doing. Also, I feel my knitting is getting better. Like I am improving. Obviously, I'm a beginner, so it's not going to be perfect, but that doesn't matter. I can knit. At least I can do the basic knitting. Obviously, once I've got better at the basic garter knit stitch, because there's only two niches. Sorry, can't remember words. There's only two main stitches in knitting, which is the knit stitch and the purl stitch, and it's how you combine the two that creates different, results. So I'll be doing the purl stitch is kind of a reverse of the knit stitch, but I'm just focusing on the basic knit stitch for now. And move on to the purl stitch when I feel I've got a lot better at the knit stitch sort of thing. But that'll be where I go head next. So yeah. So in this video, I just wanted to just talk about something that I've been. Sorry, I just noticed something on the camera. It annoys me. How did that get on the camera? So I just noticed it's got. My hands must have had something on them and it got on the camera. It doesn't really matter. It's a white camera, so stains and things show. It doesn't matter, really. It just annoys me, a bit. Because I don't like stains. I'll clean it later. But yeah, so sorry, what I was saying is I've been doing some research recently on why the word handicap as a word to describe disabled people historically, why that word came to be seen as offensive, because in my research I couldn't find anything that shows that the word handicap was ever an offensive word, and I found this interesting because people say it's not PC to say it anymore, it's old-fashioned, it's negative and it's offensive. Personally, I think we live in a society of offence where people seem to get offended over everything these days, offended over everything and offended over nothing, it seems. or rather, to put it another way, offended over everything, but things that matter, people don't give a crap about. If you see what I mean. But yeah, I was googling to try and find out why the word handicap was offensive, and I couldn't really find any real information as to why it was offensive. But I landed upon an article. It's in Mental Floss magazine, it's like an online magazine, and the article was entitled "Why Did Disabled Replace Handicapped?" So this was a very interesting article. So I just want to share some of the main sort of points from the article. So in the late 1800s, so the late sort of Victorian period, handicapped became to be used increasingly as a way to talk about a range of disadvantages. So not just mental handicap, but you could be economically, socially and morally handicapped by circumstances, so by the situation that you were in. So your circumstances could handicap you. So you could be economically handicapped if, you were, say, you didn't get enough money or whatever, or you had to receive, if you were poor, then you were economically handicapped. But it wasn't until the early 1900s, really, that the term became to be used more widely for specifically mental handicap. So before the early 1900s, it was used more broadly, but in the early 1900s, it became to be used more specifically for mental and physical handicaps, or what we now call disabilities. And the word handicap was actually borrowed from racetrack language. In racing, horse racing, a horse that was stronger or faster could be given a handicap, which was a weight or a longer distance or a later start, to equalise the chances of the competitors. So that, if the horse was, say, too strong, it might have an unfair advantage, so they would handicap the horse to slow it down, to equalise the chances. And that could simply be a weight that was put on the horse, but it could also be, as I said, a longer distance or a later start in the race. Now, initially, parties to such matches agreed to the conditions of the handicap by placing their hands into a cap and either pulling out or leaving cash stakes they had placed there. So the word handicap literally comes from hand in cap, from the racetrack. It has got nothing to do with street begging, someone like a beggar on the street putting a hand out for money, which is, I think, why some people think it's offensive, simply because they don't understand the original meaning of the word. And for some reason, the etymology got confused and people gave it a wrong etymology. They thought that it referred to begging, when it has nothing to do with that at all. It literally comes from hand in cap, from the racetrack. So as I said, it was applied to physical and mental differences in the early 1900s. Now, this was seen as progressive, actually, and enlightened at the time, because what had been seen before as individual failures of a person, were recast as disadvantages with respect to a larger context. So the larger context was handicapping a person. There wasn't anything wrong with the person, the individual, but the wider circumstances around the person, the social context, was handicapping them. So I guess at the time was seen as enlightened and progressive, in comparison to earlier words such as imbecile, cripple, and a whole host of other labels that were thoroughly offensive and used pejoratively to kind of denigrate individuals and suggest there was something wrong with them. Handicap, on the contrary, was seen as progressive because it was saying there was nothing wrong with the individual. It was the circumstances that was weighing them down. There were a range of different handicaps. It wasn't just mental or physical. There were loads of different handicaps. Anyone could be handicapped at any time by a whole range of different things. That wasn't in their control, essentially. And mental and physical handicaps was just one way in which you could be handicapped out of many others. So if life was a horse race in inverted commas, then the person with a physical disability or a mental disability couldn't compete as well because of the burden they'd been handed. Not because they were defective by nature, but simply because they were carrying a burden that slowed them down in the race of life. If you think of life as a race, obviously that's rather a capitalist kind of way of viewing life. Obviously we don't need to see life as a race or a competition, but if you were to look at it from that lens, then being weighed down, burdened, say something maybe you were born with, not something you'd chosen, but some burden that had been placed on you maybe by just the luck of the draw, really, the way you were born, or anything, it could sort of slow you down, but there's nothing actually wrong with you. It wasn't a character defect or anything. You weren't wrong, you were just simply just bad luck, you just happened to be handicapped. And over the next decades, the old words that caused disabilities as personal flaws, such as cripple, imbecile, etc., were replaced by handicapped. And by the 1970s, handicap was the preferred term in sociological studies and in legislation. They used the word handicapped. Interestingly, not so much the word disability, which has a far longer usage than the word handicap, going back 200 years before the word handicapped came on the scene. And disability has, its etymology is far more, it's far more negative than the word handicap, because it literally means rendered incapable. Handicap does not mean rendered incapable, it simply means you have a burden that slows you down. It doesn't mean you're incapable, it just means that you have an unfair kind of disadvantage compared to other people. It's not your fault, but it slows you down. Now, so things started to change at just that time, so around the 1970s, with the birth of the disability rights movement. And they were fighting for more self-determination and independence, because historically, disabled or handicapped people, take your pick, had very little autonomy, self-determination, and things were often thrust upon them and decided for them by other people. It was very patronising. They couldn't decide for themselves how to define their existence. It was all decided for them by other people. They were infantilised, treated like children. So the word handicapped came to be seen as negative because they saw it as being a term that was used by those with power, and they hadn't chosen the term. So they, as part of their kind of self-determination, they decided they didn't like the term handicapped, and they were going to choose the word disabled instead of the word of handicapped. And this seems counterintuitive because at first glance the handicapped is more enlightened, as it replaced those other very offensive terms, as I already mentioned. And disabled literally means rendered incapable, and as I said, it was already in use 200 years before handicapped came on the scene, so it's a very old word. There's nothing progressive about it. It wasn't a new word that was coined at that time. It was actually in existence way before the word handicapped. And as I already said, for some, the word handicapped evoked the idea of beggar with a cap in hand, although this was not the original source of the word, and that was a mistaken etymology. That's completely not what the word meant, anyway. But for some reason, some people came to think that's what it meant, and took on those connotations when it's got nothing to do with begging at all. And also, disabled at the time came to be seen as attractive because of its very cold clinical connotation, meaning it lacked euphemism or patronising attitude. In other words, so you cannot euphemize the word disability. Things that were, and that disability was seen as superior to terms that were, disability came to be seen as a better word to use in place of terms such as special, which is a euphemism, and the word special, by the way, was actually mainly used by parents because they didn't want to use the word disability. But the problem with euphemisms like the word special is they actually end up becoming very patronising, and by trying to kind of hide the facts, you actually end up drawing attention in a very kind of negative way, and it becomes stigmatising. I hate the word special. That's called the, it's got a name, euphemistic, I can't remember the name now, it's got a name. I can't remember what it's called, it's annoying. Everything eventually is replaced and euphemised, basically, as everything eventually becomes offensive, essentially. But yeah, disability was seen as better because it was more to the point and you couldn't euphemise it. It states what it says on the tin, call a spade sort of thing, which ultimately is less patronising and less offensive to the person with the disability, arguably. And now, as I said, the main problem with the word handicap, though, was that it had not been chosen by the people it was supposed to describe. So as part of their fight for self-determination, they rejected any term that had been imposed on them by societal structures, and they wanted to choose their own word, and so they landed on the word disability, and that became the rallying cry for disability rights movement, which they call themselves disability rights movement, and they saw it as part of the control that social workers had over their lives, and that they were rejecting term imposed on them by HCD. So I'm going to move over to video number 2, just wrap this up, to move to video number 2 now.